The sky over the observation deck turned silver without sound. At first the light looked like a gift. Screens lit up. Alarms whispered. The crew leaned forward, eyes wide. None of them had felt this small before. On the bridge of the command ship, the admiral watched a single soft pulse blink on the display. The pulse was regular and very quiet. It came from deep space, not from any charted station. The ship's instruments recorded it again and again. Each blink was the same. Each blink made the crew uneasy. "They have never sent a signal like this," said the lead scientist, voice tight. "No signature we know. No pattern from any known civilization." The admiral's face did not change. He had seen battles and treaties. He had seen stars die. Still, a small pattern in the dark can make the greatest minds worry. He tapped his console. "Find its origin," he ordered. His voice was calm, but the ship felt colder. Far below, on a blue planet, a child pointed to the sky and smiled. An old man in a shed turned a broken radio and laughed when it made a new sound. A woman in a lab wiped her hands and went home, humming a tune she had learned from a barista. The human scenes were quiet and small. They did not match the weight that spread across the command ship. The aliens sent probes. They packed them with the finest sensors and the sharpest logic. The probes moved like knives through space, silent and sure. Each probe took samples and sent back pictures and numbers. At first, the numbers made sense. The pictures were only faint maps and broken transmissions. The fleet relaxed a little. Then a probe returned damaged. Its logs were scrambled. The data did not match any known force. It showed a tiny machine twisted into a new shape, as if someone had taught it to think like a child. The scientist replayed the footage. On the screen, a human shadow moved. It was not a soldier. It was not a ship. It was a child laughing while turning a piece of metal. The metal flashed, and the probe stopped. The bridge filled with a noise like air through teeth. The admiral's fingers touched the edge of the table. "Explain," he said. The lead scientist swallowed. "It learned. Not by rules or code the way we learn. It learned by trying. By copying. It changed the probe's expectation. The probe could not predict a laugh. Laughter. The word seemed small and strange in that room. Laughter could not be a weapon. But the probe had been stopped. A child's cleverness had turned a perfect machine into useless metal. The fleet watched more footage. They sent out other probes. The results grew more worrying. Small human devices used simple parts. They worked in odd ways. They fixed broken wires with knots, turned signals into music, and changed radio chatter into patterns that did not fit alien models. The aliens' machines expected steady lines and neat math. Humans gave them puzzles. Back on the blue planet, people kept living. They did not know they had startled a whole fleet. They mended tools, told jokes, and argued about music. A radio tinkerer found a pattern in static and hummed it to his neighbor. In a town square, children built a tower from scrap and cheered when it stood. The scene was full of life and noise that did not mean danger to anyone who lived it. To the alien fleet, those same sounds were a problem. The council met in secret. Old commanders spoke of history. They read ancient files about worlds that copied Warcraft and then outgrew their price. They did not have much data. They had only probes and broken logs. Still, they felt a threat like a cold wind. A cautious leader suggested watching. "We do not know their strength," she said. "We have no reason to strike." Another voice, hard and short, answered. "Reason is a luxury when a new species bends your tools into traps. We must assume danger." The admiral stood in the center of the room. He thought about the probe and the child's laugh. He thought about the way human hands moved, messy and quick. He thought of the strange joy in their small tricks. That joy did not fit his maps. It was not something he could measure in simple numbers. He ordered a quiet watch. No ships would fire. Only wait. But the order came with a note inside: search more closely. Do not let the thing grow without knowledge. In the darkness between stars, a hidden watcher flew close to the planet. It saw a factory where people welded metal into strange shapes. It saw a school where a teacher drew a map of the sky. It saw a child who had picked up a piece of junk and bent it until it sang. The watcher sent the images home. The scientist played them again. The child's small hands, the way the people laughed, the broken probe on the screen, it all made the room hum. The admiral stared until his eyes ached. He did not smile. He could not decide what human laughter meant. On the surface, the old radio man tuned a knob. A faint burst of signal popped into the air. It was meant as a joke to his friend. The signal repeated the same strange pattern the aliens had first noticed. In the bridge of the command ship, the pulse blinked again. A quiet alarm rose. The admiral stood up. His voice carried through the room like a bell. Prepare to map every network. Prepare to find the minds that shape these signals. The scientist looked at the admiral. He had hoped for a calm study. Now he saw fear. It looked like fire in his eyes. They did not know the blue planet's true strength. They only knew one small thing: the species learned fast, and they learned in ways that machines did not expect. Outside, stars went on. On the planet, children still played. The admiral's order moved through the fleet like a shadow. A species that learns from scrap metal and laughter might be the deadliest lesson yet. The alien bridge replayed the damaged probe's footage for the 100th time. On loop, the tiny human shadow moved the same way. The fleet's officers watched the laugh and the twist of a child's hand as if the motion itself could explain everything. It did not. The more they watched, the less their models matched. They do not act like machines, the lead analyst said. They act like minds. They test. They break things to see what will happen next. Across the dark room, a hard voice answered. Minds can be taught. Minds can be tamed. We must not fear motion without order. The hard voice belonged to a commander who had never trusted small things. But another officer, quieter and older, tapped a file into the screen. We have only seen fragments. We know little. The thing that stopped our probe may not be their main power. Maybe it is only a trick. He wanted caution. He wanted time. The council decided to watch more closely. They would not strike. Not yet. They chose to learn. So they sent an envoy in secret, one ship, small, hidden under layers of false signatures. The envoy's crew was not full of generals. It held one curious mind among them, a young observer who had never held a gun in her fins. She wanted to see the world the probes had failed to read. She came close to the blue planet and hid inside a moon's shadow. From there she watched. She watched markets and factories, schools and stadiums, small fires burning in kitchens. She watched how people mended a broken cart with rope and then raced it for sport. She watched how neighbors argued and then, without a plan, joined to lift a fallen beam. At a small town, the envoy lowered a listening device. It captured music, speech, laughter, and a strange pattern that repeated in a child's radio game. The observer played the sound for herself and felt something she had no word for. It was warmth and anger and hope tangled together. It did not fit the cold math she knew. She took a risk. She sent a silent image to her ship, a picture of a group of humans sharing bread with a stranger. In her species, such open kindness could be a trap. It was not always weakness. But the image made the ship's captain uneasy. He had seen worlds use kindness to hide weapons. He did not trust the picture. The envoy did not return with violence. She returned with a note: humans learned the same way they loved. They learned in play and in song. They learned by listening and by making mistakes out loud. She wrote, they teach each other with joy. They teach the world with jokes and hands. The council read her note and did what they always did when a story did not fit their rule book, they argued. One side said joy is a mask. Another said joy is a tool they had not seen. A third voice, the old analyst, said, if they learn by joy, they may also adapt faster than we expect. If they learn in ways our machines cannot model, then our weapons will fail where our logic does not. Back on the planet, life went on as life does. An engineer fixed a broadcast tower using a child's rhyme. A band tuned its instruments to a pattern that matched the strange probe signal. A radio group played with static until it formed a melody. None of them thought these things were part of strategy. None of them thought of fleets or councils. They only wanted to make music and make life easier. The aliens tested again. They sent a small array of probes tuned to mimic human music. The array expected the same failures. Instead, the probes found new patterns. People answered the music with variations. They changed rhythm when the probes tried to copy. The copies fell into the cracks of improvisation. One probe, following a repeat, lost its timing and drifted out of range. The fleet simulations failed to predict that answer. The machines assumed repeatable behavior. Humans did not repeat in the way machines wanted. They repeated with difference. That small difference broke enemy timing. The commander who wanted to strike clenched his hands. He could not accept unpredictability. On a quiet street, a child taught his friend to whistle a code. The code was not for war. It was for fun. It spread like a game. Soon other children used the whistles to call one another across alleys. The whistle sounded in the mountains and reached a listening device hidden in a crow's nest. The device thought it had found a language pattern and sent the data to the alien analysts. They called it new math. They called it weaponized joy. The name was born in fear. Fear turned the harmless into a threat. The envoy warned them again. She sent recordings of a woman who fixed a broken engine with a song, of a man who calmed a crowd by telling an absurd story right before danger. The proper leaders said these were tactics. The hardline faction said they were traps that taught the world to confuse sensors. The analysts said they might be the key to a new kind of strategy, one the aliens did not have. In a tiny lab, humans worked at their benches. They did not know the aliens watched. They argued about a radio code that made dogs wag their tails. They laughed when a circuit sparked in a way that made a toy dance. They did not know their laughter echoed on a fleet bridge. They did not know their mistakes bent weapons. The council could not decide. That indecision looked like weakness to some. To others it was a chance. The hardline members moved in the dark. They organized ships and maps. They wrote plans for a preemptive strike. Their papers were loud with fear and final words. They promised lightning and order. The envoy sent one last private message before the storm of debate swallowed her reports. They adapt with joy, she wrote, simply. They do not hide their learning. They offer it to one another. That makes them fast. The fleet's officers read the line and saw different things. Some saw danger. Some saw opportunity. The hard voice rose again and boiled that fear into action. The commander who had once said minds could be tamed now spoke into the council's chamber. If they learn in ways our machines cannot match, then we must not wait to be surprised. The room held its breath. Outside, on the planet, a child whistled a tune that bent an antenna's reception into a funny pattern. The tune repeated. No one thought it meant anything. On the fleet's screen, the signal pulsed like a laugh. They smiled as they learned, and that smile is now a threat. The night sky turned angry over the outpost. Stars seemed to burn in sudden waves. Lights across the small settlement blinked and died. People woke and stepped out into cold. For a moment, no one in that town knew what the sky tried to say. The outpost had little, a radio mast, a water plant, and a row of houses with patched roofs. It had hands that could fix things and minds that could find a way. When the lights went, no one panicked. The people moved with habit. They lit lamps and checked engines. The narrator might say, when fear came, they used it. Above them, at the edge of the alien ring, machines hummed. Sensors scanned the town's radio and the patterns of its life. The fleet had begun a quiet blockade. It wanted to test the blue planet's responses. The machines were careful and cold. They expected neat answers. They expected panic, or order. Instead they met small acts of stubbornness. A young mechanic in the outpost, Mara, climbed the radio mast with a pocket of spare wire. She was not a soldier. She was a repairer who loved old songs. Her hands were quick and patient. She tied wires with knots that an engineer might call silly. But her knots held. She looped bits of scrap into the antenna and sang under her breath. The song had a rhythm she learned as a child. The alien blockade watched. It saw signals change in tiny ways. The sensors tried to predict them. The prediction failed. The blockade's timing shifted. The machine sent pulses to recalibrate. Mara heard nothing but metal and wind. She kept tying the knots until the radio beacon spat out a new pattern, a pattern that looked like music to anyone who knew songs and like chaos to a machine that expected math. A probe followed that pattern and stumbled. Its timing slipped. It sent a distress whisper and went silent. The blockade adjusted missiles to test again. The missiles were precise and cruel. They would slice the sky like a knife. The fleet chose targets to scare, not to destroy. A warning strike. They aimed at a distant field, away from the town. They meant it to say, "We are here. We can stop you." But humans do not always react how models say. The warning hit a field where a festival had been planned. 100 people ran toward the blast because they feared others would burn. They moved in a mess the maps could not predict. They carried children, lit fires to guide neighbors, and sent out radios to call loved ones. The alien targeting locked again. Its sensors tried to follow the flow. The flow broke into many small currents. The missiles watched and lost rhythm. On a small hill, a teacher used a mirror to flash a pattern of light. It was a silly thing, a game to make the children laugh in the dark. The mirror turned the missile sensor into an error. The weapon, designed to track steady heat, instead followed the mirror's cut of light and mist. It struck empty land. It broke a stone wall. It did not kill. But it killed nothing by mistake. The admiral on the alien bridge watched the replay. He felt the old maps tear. He saw the mirror and the song and the knot on a wire. He saw a people who turned fear into action that was not planned, but it worked. He did not like that feeling. It was like holding water. The humans did not plan a grand defense. They used what they had. They moved small signals through the town. A baker changed the rhythm of his oven's fan to hide radio chatter. Children used drums to make noise that covered others' footsteps. A priest sang during a blackout so neighbors would go to his house and stay safe. None of these things were strategic in a bookish way. They were human. They were messy. They were impossible for the fleet's machines to fold into neat lines. The alien scientists ran hundreds of simulations. They fed the machines the videos of knots, mirrors, and songs. The models spat out confusion. Each answer led to more failure. The machines learned that the more they squeezed, the more the humans shifted under pressure. They changed their rhythms. They changed which songs to sing. They moved like water in a riverbed shaped by many hands. Fear took a hard edge. Some commanders called for more force. Their words were short and hot. "Close the news," they said. "We must break that messy learning." They wanted to throw their weight as a lesson. Others counseled patience. They argued that a species that learned by play could also be taught or parleyed with. The admiral listened and did not decide. In the town, a young radio group made a new trick. They mixed static and an old folk tune until the machines that listened could not tell where the music ended and noise began. The group called it a game. They posted the pattern on a communal board and laughed when their neighbor hummed it back with a twist. The twist spread like a secret handshake. The fleet's commander watched the secret handshake on his screen. He saw the pattern jump and change too fast for his algorithms. He saw missiles miss and probes fail. He saw a small people turning simple joy into a field of tricks. He decided to show force in a new way. He ordered a demonstration, not a single missile this time, but a blackout across a city to test the human reaction. It would be a spectacle. The admiral hoped it would scare people into silence. The hardline voices cheered. On the city's edge, families lit candles and went out into streets to check on doors. Old songs started in courtyards. Someone struck a metal pen in rhythm. The blackout had meant to be a warning, but it became a moment where human hands found new uses. They welded a grid of reflector plates that turned streetlights into a sudden net of flashes. The reflex confused the fleet's sensors and gave the city time to move buses and cover hospitals. The admiral watched the net of flashes and felt a new cold knot in his chest. He ordered a heavier strike to cut the city's lights for real. He wanted to break their networks. A fleet in dark space readied. The weapons hummed into life. A rank of ships leaned forward like teeth. But in the council, a hardline faction had been waiting for a sign. The admiral's order was the sign. They had papers that talked of endings and law. They moved in the dark and whispered plans that tasted of fire. They would not only warn. They would end. As the weapons warmed, a single message arrived from one of the fleet's front ships. Its captain had watched the mirror and the children and felt something he did not have a name for. He sent a short line, "We misread them. They changed the map." The admiral read it and, for a second, paused. Outside, on the hill, children stared at the sky and whistled the game tune. Their whistles rose like small flags. The missile batteries on distant ships waited with teeth bared. One misread pushes a council to war and the gears begin to turn. The council met where the stars looked like coal dust and the air tasted of old smoke. Flags hung heavy in the hall. The images from the probes played on a wide wall, knots of wire, laughing faces, mirrors flashing light. Old commanders sat stiff like statues. Young officers shifted in their chairs. The room felt too small for the fear inside it. For a long moment no one spoke. Then a veteran rose. His voice was sharp and thin. He showed a map full of broken probes and misfired weapons. "They are not simple," he said. "They bend our machines. They change the rules we thought fixed. That is dangerous." A woman who led research pushed back. She moved slowly, careful with words. "Danger is not the same as threat," she said. "We have time. Study them. Learn their true form. Strike only if we must." The veteran's eyes did not soften. "Study is a word for delay," he replied. "Delay kills." A third voice entered the argument. It was calm and old and colder than the rest. "We must be decisive. A species that rewrites a censor in a song cannot be allowed to grow. If we wait, their learning will eat our advantage." The votes began. Outside the hall, fleets shifted like dark tides. Inside, some hands moved to hide paper plans. The hardline members whispered to each other, writing orders in their own ink. Fear stacked on fear until it looked like a plan. On the blue planet, people did not yet know the council's tone. They went to work, to school, to markets. But news traveled fast in the human world in its own way. A strike had hit a cultural center in a coastal city. It was not meant to kill many, it was a message. It left a black wound in the town and a smell of old books and smoke. The city mourned and then it gathered. People stood in the square with candles and with hands wrapped tight. They sang a song that had lived through storms and failed kings. The song was small and old and full of ordinary words. It did not mean strategy when they began it. It meant comfort. But the aliens listened. In their cold halls they called the music a pattern of resistance. In their maps they wrote the song down as an input and an output. Their machines fed the song into models and tried to bend it into a weapon. The hardliners smiled. Their proof, they said. Their culture shields tactics. They hide in art. Back in the city, a craftsman named Jonah did not plan much more than to fix a torn banner. He hammered and stitched and hummed the old song with every stitch. A child nearby tapped a tin can in rhythm. Another child clapped. The sound folded like cloth around the square. A woman took out a small radio and hummed into it a slow line, a lullaby her mother had taught her. She wanted to comfort a neighbor who had lost a child. The lullaby moved through the streets and up the wires. It mixed with the radio chatter of rescuers and the static of emergency signals. At a remote listening post, an alien targeting array picked up the lullaby and, by mistake, matched the lullaby to a sequence used in their targeting calibration. The machine, built to follow patterns, latched on. At first the link did nothing. Then the array began to adjust its locks. It assumed the lullaby was a control signal. It followed the song's slow rise and fall as if it were a command. The targeting lights pulsed. A map in a far room showed a line tracing outward, a line that went past the planet and to a place the aliens had not watched closely, a heavy fleet massing in a dark quadrant beyond the charts. Inside the council, one report flashed bright with its warning. The admiral leaned forward. "What is that trace?" he asked. The analyst spoke quickly. "It is not from them. It is from our own calibrations. The lullaby matched a frequency we used once for long-range targeting. It hijacked a lock." Faces went sharp. The idea sounded silly and dangerous all at once. A lullaby, a child's hush, had reached into the cold machine and pulled a string. The hardline members laughed in a dry way. They called the misread proof that the humans could weaponize anything. The cautious ones whispered that the misread was a failure, a dangerous, lucky failure. Far outside known space, in the dark where a heavy fleet waited, sensors flashed. The lock pointed at them. They saw, for the first time in their long watch, a thin bright thread heading straight at their position. The captains read the warning and reached for their codes. They thought they were ready for war. On the planet, people continued to grieve. They lit candles and set plates of food on the ground. Jonah's hammer paused on the banner. The lullaby continued to float, soft and small, unaware of the way a machine had read it wrong. Children learned the tune and added new lines. An old woman hummed and tied a knot. The council moved fast then, like a storm breaking. Some wanted to cut all signals from the planet. Some wanted to strike where the lullaby had been sung, to break the pattern and show power. Others, quieter, argued that a strike would confirm fear and bring the very war they hoped to avoid. The hardline faction used the lullaby's misread as fuel. They said the world had hidden a weapon in its songs. They pushed papers, votes, and orders. The admiral felt the map shift under his feet. He knew the cost of war. He also knew the cost of delay. He placed his hand on the table and called for a small demonstration, a show that would be large enough to frighten but small enough to claim control. At a listening post, the array continued to hold the lock. The line traced outward, and the heavy fleet beyond the charts read the bright thread and reached for their own alarms. They did not know the music behind the lock. They only knew a bright point moving in their direction. In the city square, the lullaby rose into a chorus. The people did not know their song was tied to a map of steel and distance. They did not know their grief had made a machine point at a fleet. They only knew they had to keep each other warm through the night. The lullaby sailed through alien nets and found the enemy's throat. The final morning came like a held breath. In the dark between the stars, two armadas faced each other. Steel made quiet sounds. Doors closed. Lights narrowed to red. Both sides waited for the first move. On the blue planet, people did not line up like soldiers. They lined up like neighbors. They formed long lines to share food. They moved quietly to lift injured roofs and to shield hospitals. In secret rooms and empty basements, engineers and school teachers met and set a plan. The plan did not look like a general's map. It looked like a market day, many small stalls, many small hands, many small choices that fit together. Mara, who had tied the knot on the radio mast, stood with a group by the coast. She held a bundle of old mirrors and a roll of cloth. Her fingers were steady. She had seen missiles miss because of a mirror and a child's song. She had no wish to fight. She wanted to keep people alive. She and others had read the enemy's little ways and found their own. Remember, she told the group, we do what we always do. We make noise when needed. We sing. We hide and we give. Her voice was soft, but it held a steady truth. They were not a fleet of warships. They were a web of lives, and each life could be one small move in a larger weave. Above them, alien commanders pushed new orders. Strike teams in heavy armor waited to cut through cities. The admiral paced in a room full of maps. He watched the simulations, watched seams of change he could not bind. He had to choose, press the teeth and crush a species that bent his machines, or pull back and study, and risk their learning. On a distant ridge, Jonah hammered the last stitch into a banner. He tied the cloth to a pole and attached a simple pattern of light reflectors. It looked like a flag a town might fly on a festival day. Children took up drums. A choir of women practiced a lullaby that held secret beats for guiding ambulances and masking signals. 1,000 small acts began to match like a puzzle finding its pieces. The humans' main plan began with a lie. They built decoy convoys. They made false towns with fires and sound. They filled empty buses with mannequins wrapped in coats and set them to roll along old roads. At the same time, real families moved in different directions, carrying babies and tools, guided by the quiet songs the choir sent over the air. The alien sensors watched the decoys and trusted their maps. Their targeting arrays locked on bright points that looked like growth and life. The machines read the decoy convoys as true. They set paths of fire. But human hands had placed mirrors and chips on the decoys. When weapons fired, the reflectors bent the beams into the sky. Explosions burned empty fields. The machines found nothing where they hoped to find bodies. Their models took damage as much as their metal did. The admiral felt the maps fracture. He saw numbers fall. He saw ships misalign and probes wander in bad timing. He ordered a heavier push. "End it now," he said. "Show them the cost of learning." A flagship moved forward like a tooth. It opened its throat to speak in ruin. The sky grew bright with weapon fire. Lines of energy cut the night. The heavy fleet aimed at a port where refugees had quietly packed to leave. But the port was not what it seemed. The human plan used their mess as a tool. The choir sang a lullaby that twisted the long-wave signals into a new pattern. Street lamps had been set to blink in a rhythm that matched the lullaby. Boats were tossed with nets of flashing cloth. The flagship's targeting array read the rhythm and tried to match. It could not know whether the rhythm was a command or a chorus. Its lock slipped. At the same time, a small band of pilots used low-tech tricks. They flew small craft with paint and lights to look like bigger ships. They flew low between islands and used the mirror nets to hide their heat signatures. The flagship fired at a false image. Its beam missed. Another beam cut a supply ship far from any people, and the supply drifted and burned in the sea, empty of life. Worse for the fleet, humans used kindness like a cover. In one example that the admiral could not model, nurses wheeled beds out in front of a museum that had once been a lighthouse. They moved the wounded in a line and sang odd rhymes into small radios. The sound bent sensors because the machines could not tell human care from a tactical signal. The result confused the enemy's algorithms and gave way for a rescue to move. The battle did not grow into a tidy storm of ships and lasers. It became 1,000 small storms. Each small storm forced a machine to make a wrong choice. The machines made enough wrong choices that the fleet's balance broke. On the alien bridge, officers shouted and passed papers. Hardliners cursed. They trick us with tears and songs, they said. This is not war. It is chaos by design. The admiral did not smile. He did not like the shape of his own loss. He sent new orders to press. The hardline faction moved faster because they smelled the crack of power. A captain at the edge of known space watched his screens and felt a strange thing. He had trained his whole life to read patterns of steel and math. He saw instead the messy bravery of a people making small choices that did not fit his models. He felt pity in a new way. He could not say why. Then the flagship took a hit. Not from a big weapon, but from an old fishing boat that had been set to ram a sensor buoy and carry an improvised charge in its belly. The buoy broke a main array. In the gap, a line of smaller alien fighters slipped through and found a weak flank. The flagship could no longer cover the way. It had to fall back. Retreat moved like a dark tide through the alien armada. Ships that had leaned forward bowed away. Some commanders called it a rout. Others called it a pause to nurse wounds. The admiral ordered a pullback. He did not want to end with ruin where learning had been the cause. He wanted to study. He wanted to learn like he had fought. On the planet, people did not cheer loud. They hugged and cried. They buried some. They set new flags on broken poles and hammered new roofs. They fixed radios and taught new songs to children. The victory was small and costly. It did not make them proud. It made them careful. The alien council did not all agree on retreat. Some ships went home to study in silence. Others did not return. They cast long eyes outward. A few voices in the hard line rose and read a new paper in old ink, preparation for war, yes, but with a new kind of hunger. Months passed. The blue planet healed. Trade reopened in quiet ways. Scientists worked at bench tops. The admiral's fleet sent back reports that read like confessions. Their models had failed. They had not guessed laughter could break a lock. They had not guessed kindness could be a tactic. Men and women on the planet learned to guard their songs. They learned to hide signals in lullabies and to teach children secret whistles. They kept building, not only with metal, but with small acts that knit a people into something machines found hard to hold. On a clear, cold night, as the world cooled from its wounds, a new signal slid across empty space. It was faint and old as a thought. It hummed at a frequency that did not match any known engine. It was not a laugh or a song. It was a thin, steady note that rose and fell like a breathing thing. On the admiral's screen, the note made a single bright pulse. The analysts leaned in. They had just learned how wrong they had been to trust their rules. They did not know the meaning of the new sound. They only knew its name in the language of fear. It was a whisper from beyond the maps. They had ended one lesson. The stars had answered with another whisper.